Before we cross into the unknown, leave a hello in the comments. Even the smallest signal can ripple across galaxies, guiding fellow wanderers to this tale. Let me know you're out there. A voice among the stars, listening with me beyond the veil. Engines roared as the fleet surged through Titan's orbit, breaking the quiet of frozen methane clouds. Admiral Kale gripped the console, eyes fixed on the blinking chronometer marking unauthorized temporal activity. "They said we were reckless," he muttered, voice taut with anger. Below, automated repair drones clattered against hull plates, each strike echoing like a heartbeat. Humanity's forbidden technology had awoken, hidden beneath the ice, waiting. Kale's comm blared, a warning from the Senate fleet, interception imminent. Yet in his gut, he knew delay meant death. The war was already moving, faster than any timeline should allow. On the surface, Chrono-Forges hummed beneath methane seas, their time-bending cores glowing violet. Engineers in exosuits synchronized the sequence, each pulse shaping tomorrow's weapons today. Kale watched through orbital sensors, counting the seconds until first contact. "This is more than rebellion, it's survival," whispered Lieutenant Rin, scanning anomalies on her console. The Senate's embargo had made them ghosts, but even ghosts could ignite storms. A ripple of distorted light pulsed from the forge, proof the machines had begun their temporal craft. Kale's hands clenched. If the Senate intervened now, every advantage would vanish. Humanity's gamble was underway. Alarms shattered the silence aboard the Titan-class cruiser Erebus. Communications flickered with fragmented Senate codes, distorted by temporal interference. Commander Lyra barked orders, her voice slicing tension like a blade. "Shields to full. Deploy intercept drones." The fleet jerked in synchronized maneuvers, anticipating ambushes that hadn't yet occurred, or maybe hadn't happened yet. Somewhere in the folds of time, the enemy was already striking. Sensors traced anomalies, each a ghost echo of events yet to unfold. Lyra's stomach knotted. Every signal was a lie until confirmed. Humanity was playing chess with tomorrow, and the first moves had already bloodied the board. Deep within Titan's methane caverns, engineers calibrated the Chrono-Forges with trembling precision. Each forge hummed with the resonance of future battles, shaping rifles, drones, and armor in a time compressed to minutes. "We can't fail," whispered Rin, watching the glowing instruments. Sparks of distorted reality rippled along cavern walls, warping the light around them. Above, orbital monitors detected faint distortions in space-time, a warning or a trap. The Admiral's log blinked insistently. Temporal signatures accelerating, unknown variables detected. Every second brought new mysteries. Every pulse of the forge hinted at weapons that could arrive before the first warning shot was fired. Lieutenant Kess staggered into the control room, eyes wide with disbelief. "They're here. Inside the timeline," he whispered, voice trembling. Admiral Kale froze. Across the fleet, a squadron of Senate enforcers had appeared not in orbit, but in a warped version of the present. A ghost fleet materializing from the very seconds they'd yet to live. Kale's chest tightened. Betrayal didn't taste like metal. It tasted like inevitability. "Rin, accelerate the forge output. We cannot let them lock us out of the future." The ship shuddered, engines straining as temporal currents twisted around the hull like angry serpents. Beneath the ice, Chrono-Forges surged with violet fury. Engineers scrambled, aware that every pulse could fracture reality. A weapon, a plasma lance, formed before their eyes, a creation birthed from seconds that hadn't yet existed. "Deploy prototypes now," Kale ordered, overriding safety protocols. Temporal distortion bathed the cavern, and shadows of possible futures flickered across faces. The fleet above sensed the shift. The Senate's ghostly armada wavered, unsure. For a heartbeat, time itself was a battlefield, and humanity wielded the first strike of a war that spanned not just space, but every tick of every clock. Sensors screamed as distortions erupted around the fleet. Commander Lyra's hands moved over controls like she was conducting an orchestra of chaos. Ships twisted in warped vectors, dodging attacks fired before they existed. "Focus on temporal dampeners," she shouted. Kale's voice rang over comms. "Do not engage conventionally. Every shot could erase us from the timeline." The fleet danced with ghosts, firing anticipatory volleys at enemies whose arrival had already been calculated by the Chrono-Forges. The line between predator and prey blurred. Each maneuver was a question of physics and probability. On Titan, engineers held their breath as the forge core stabilized. Time collapsed in concentric rings around them, each pulse crafting defensive drones that blinked into existence ahead of enemy maneuvers. "Rin, release the phased units," Kale instructed, watching through orbital projection. Beams of blue light surged upward, bending past space-time distortions, striking Phantom Senate ships before they could fire. In the caverns, sweat and awe mingled. The machines had become more than tools. They were humanity's answer to inevitability. Outside, reality quivered. Tomorrow's war had begun today. The bridge shook violently. Lyra's console flickered, displaying impossible numbers. Ships destroyed before even leaving docks, timelines folding into themselves. "Status report," Kale demanded. Sensors showed fragments of battles that had yet to occur, entire squadrons erased from existence and then reborn mid-flight. "Temporal instability increasing," whispered Rin, voice tight with fear. Every action now had a cascading effect, a ripple threatening to undo the fleet entirely. The Admiral gritted his teeth. Controlling the future was a privilege reserved for no one, but humanity had taken it anyway. Beneath Titan, the final sequence for the Forge's assault arrays began. Energy spiraled in impossible arcs, bending moments into weapons of devastating precision. Engineers monitored distortions as time shimmered around their hands. "If we miscalculate," muttered one, but Kale interrupted. "We can't afford hesitation." Each pulse sent fleets above racing through seconds that didn't exist yet. Outside, the Senate Armada wavered like a mirage, unable to predict attacks that had already landed. For the first time, the universe seemed to lean toward humanity. Not because of power, but because of mastery over time itself. Temporal ripples cracked across the Erebus's hull. Lyra's fingers flew over the console as the crew scrambled to stabilize navigation. "We're seeing echoes of ourselves," murmured a young ensign, eyes wide at phantom duplicates fighting alongside them. Kale's jaw tightened. Every second now carried 1,000 possibilities, some lethal, some miraculous. "Synchronize all temporal sensors. We need one consistent thread," he commanded. Outside, Senate warships blinked in and out of existence, their weapons firing at shadows rather than targets. Time itself had become the battlefield, and each pulse of the forge dictated which futures would survive. Beneath Titan, the Chrono-Forges quivered under increasing load. Violet arcs danced along cavern walls as engineers wrestled with sequences faster than the human mind could compute. "We're generating too many outcomes," Rin whispered, sweat streaming down her face. A prototype drone materialized midair, then flickered, unsure which timeline it belonged to. Kale's projection floated above them, a spectral hand guiding operations. "Focus the output, contain the variables," he ordered. Outside, orbital sensors registered bursts of energy colliding before they could exist. Humanity was no longer just fighting. They were orchestrating the very flow of time itself. The Senate fleet shimmered into coherent form, emerging fully from temporal distortion. "Engage, Phantoms!" Lyra shouted as the Erebus and supporting cruisers fired predictive volleys. Phantom warships dissolved mid-strike, only to reappear elsewhere, forcing rapid course corrections. Kale monitored the anomaly field, every movement a calculation of probabilities. The fleet's morale strained under paradox attacks, friendly units flickering in and out, sometimes attacking themselves. Yet in the chaos, humanity's Chrono-Forges gave them a cruel advantage. They fought not against ships, but against time itself, and they were beginning to learn its rhythm. On Titan, engineers continued to feed temporal energy into weapons assembly lines. Each forge pulse produced drones, plasma cannons, and kinetic rifles in moments compressed into milliseconds. Sparks warped reality around the cavern, painting distorted shadows on the methane ceiling. "We have to stabilize them or the timeline collapses," Rin warned. Kale's hand hovered over the command override, aware that a single misstep could erase both fleets, or worse, themselves. Outside, the ghostly Senate Armada faltered, their attacks preempted and redirected by machines that existed partly in the present, partly in every potential future. Humanity had become untouchable, if only for now. Alarms screamed as distorted energy beams tore through the void. Lyra shouted, issuing evasive patterns that seemed to bend physics. Ships twisted in impossible arcs to avoid shots fired from futures that hadn't happened yet. "We're trapped in a loop," a navigator yelled, voice shaking. Kale's voice cut through the chaos. "We are the loop." Every ship fired at shadows, every movement calculated by chrono-forged projections. A single misalignment could erase the entire fleet from existence. Yet in the storm of paradoxes, the human fleet danced with precision, a ballet choreographed by time itself. Beneath Titan, Rin initiated the final phase of weapon production. Violet pulses tore across the forge chambers, sending ripples into orbit. Plasma rifles and drones blinked into existence seconds before operators issued commands, weapons anticipating battle before it began. "Focus on synchronization," Kale instructed. One misfire could spawn a paradox too deadly to recover. Outside, the ghost fleet wavered, hesitant. Humans had seized the advantage not by numbers or firepower, but by preempting reality itself. Every second, the battlefield shifted under their command, as if time itself had taken humanity's side, at least for this moment. A plasma lance emerged from Titan's surface, warping space-time as it launched. Lyra's fleet observed from orbit as the weapon's energy rippled through the Ghost Senate ships. Impacts occurred in moments both past and future, collapsing enemy formations before they could return fire. "Targets neutralized," shouted Kale, eyes on his console. The fleet's confidence surged. Humanity had struck first in a war that hadn't fully begun. But beneath the thrill, every officer understood the cost. A single misstep could unravel all. As cruisers adjusted to new temporal coordinates, chasing phantoms that existed only in fractured seconds. Titan's engineers watched the forge pulse violently, projecting holographic schematics of weapon trajectories. "We're bending causality itself," Rin whispered, voice trembling. Drones blinked into existence mid-fall, striking phantom fleets before their crews could react. Kale's projection hovered, guiding operations with precise authority. Every pulse of energy rewrote what would happen next, creating a cascade of victories before the first shot was historically fired. Outside, the Senate fleet faltered. For the first time, humanity wasn't reacting. They were dictating the war. Every moment became a calculated strike, a proof that Chrono-Forges could win battles before battles even existed. Time shivered across the battlefield. Distorted shadows of ships flickered as paradoxes multiplied. Lyra barked commands, issuing maneuvers that spanned multiple possible outcomes simultaneously. Kyle gritted his teeth, monitoring the chrono-signatures. "If the paradox grows unchecked, the fleet may vanish," he warned. Sensors displayed impossible readings. Engagements that had already ended and those yet to begin overlapped in chaotic harmony. Yet every calculation placed humanity ahead. They weren't just fighting. They were threading the needle of causality, wielding the first advantage in a war that stretched beyond linear reality. Beneath Titan, the forge chamber pulsed with violet intensity. Engineers clung to consoles as time warped around them. Each pulse birthed weapons in futures that didn't yet exist, shaping defensive drones before enemy strikes could be launched. Rin's voice cracked as she shouted sequences, hands moving faster than the eye could follow. Outside, orbital projections showed ghost fleets dissolving, outmaneuvered in every temporal vector. Humanity's gamble had tipped the balance, but the universe had a way of balancing paradoxes. The Admiral's eyes narrowed. Victory might arrive today, but tomorrow could bring consequences no one could anticipate. The fleet trembled under unseen forces. Temporal anomalies stretched across space, distorting sensors and scrambling maneuvers. Lyra barked over the comm. Adjust to predicted anomalies. All ships, mirror movements. Kale studied the chrono readings, noting ships firing at targets before they existed. Every action rippled, rewriting trajectories in real time. "We are rewriting causality," he muttered, voice taut. Phantom Senate vessels flickered like dying stars, appearing and disappearing as if time itself mocked them. Humanity wasn't merely surviving. They were shaping the battlefield, threading a deadly dance between inevitability and free will. Beneath Titan, Chrono-Forges throbbed with violet resonance, crafting drones and weapons in preemptive loops. Engineers monitored fluctuating energy streams, aware that a single misstep could fracture reality. "Focus on synchronization. Don't let them force a paradox collapse," Rin warned. The air shimmered as prototypes blinked into existence, firing simulated strikes before real engagement. Kale's projection floated above them, orchestrating the cadence of creation. Outside, orbital sensors displayed Senate units destabilizing, their ghostly attacks intercepted before deployment. Humanity had turned time into both shield and sword. Yet the more they bent reality, the more fragile their victory became. Suddenly, an enormous temporal rift opened near Titan's orbit, warping reality. Lyra shouted, "Brace for impact, fleet integrity at risk." Ghost ships tumbled into the distortion, some emerging with weapons fired centuries before construction. Kale's knuckles whitened on the console. "They're exploiting the rift," he realized. Sensors indicated the Senate's experimental chronoships were attempting to reverse the Forge's advantage. Every second mattered. One miscalculation could erase the fleet before it fired a shot. As vessels twisted through distorted space, desperately recalibrating against impossible vectors. In Titan's cavern, Rin adjusted the Forge's temporal dampeners. Pulses of violet energy lanced upward, attempting to stabilize the rift. "If we fail, the timeline fractures entirely," she whispered. Prototypes materialized mid-construction, instantly adapting to anticipated enemy maneuvers. Kale's voice boomed over comm. "Release phased assault drones. Predict their next temporal move." Outside, ghost ships blinked unpredictably, but humanity's creation struck with preemptive precision. Reality rippled, bending under the weight of engineered futures. Every action became a test of foresight, a battle where anticipation, not reaction, determined life and death. Lyra's fleet surged, firing predictive volleys at the Senate armada. Missiles phased in and out of existence, striking ghostly hulls before crews could react. "Keep firing. Anticipate their next coordinates," Lyra commanded. Kale monitored the chrono readings, calculating multiple futures at once. Ships twisted and collided with their own shadows, yet emerged intact. The battle was no longer about firepower, but probability. Every pulse of the Forge dictated engagement outcomes, forcing the Senate into retreat, or into traps that didn't yet exist. Beneath Titan, Rin pushed the Chrono-Forges to maximum output. Drones blinked forward along projected battle paths, lasers cutting phantom warships in preemptive strikes. "We're threading reality," she said, voice tight with awe. Each pulse created weapons that existed in the present and the imminent future simultaneously. Kale's holographic hand guided engineers, orchestrating synchronized assaults with mathematical precision. Outside, the Senate fleet faltered, their unpredictability neutralized by humanity's mastery of temporal strategy. Time itself had become an ally, and the first major strike was theirs. Temporal distortions warped the horizon. Ghostly echoes of the fleet flickered in and out. Lyra barked orders, evasive maneuvers, synchronize with predicted paradox points. Sensors displayed destroyed vessels that had yet to exist, and phantom attacks that had already been nullified. Kyle gritted his teeth, calculating the consequences of every move. Humanity's fleet was both ghost and reality, threading the needle between destruction and survival. "We are both hunter and hunted," he murmured. The void itself seemed alive, bending around the weapons forged in moments yet to come. Beneath Titan, engineers held their breath as violet energy spiraled from the Chrono-Forges. Each pulse birthed defensive drones and advanced plasma arrays before enemy fire arrived. "Stabilize or perish," Rin whispered, hands shaking. Kale's projection hovered over cascading schematics, ensuring the sequence synchronized perfectly. Outside, the Senate Armada faltered in disarray, trapped by attacks from futures that hadn't happened yet. Humanity's gamble on time was winning. For now. But with each fractured second, the risk of paradox grew, threatening to erase victories before they could be claimed. A sudden tremor shook the Erebus. Temporal readings spiked to unprecedented levels. "Hull integrity compromised. Rifts expanding," Lyra shouted. Ghost ships collided with non-existent projectiles, leaving trails of warped energy. Kale's hands flew over the console. Every chronosensor screamed instability. One miscalculation, and not just the fleet, but Titan itself could vanish into a temporal void. Yet, amidst the chaos, humanity's weapons, crafted from futures yet to exist, struck with perfect timing. The first collapse had begun, but it was controlled. For now. Beneath the ice, Chrono-Forges hummed at full capacity, shaping drones and rifles in preemptive loops. Rin coordinated their release with surgical precision, each pulse countering Senate strikes before they could manifest. Violet energy rippled across the cavern, bending reality around mortal hands. Kale's projection hovered, issuing final commands before the first collapse fully manifested. Outside, ghost fleets shuddered as preemptive strikes tore through formations. Humanity had won the first major engagement, but the paradoxes created could ripple forward, threatening a future no one yet understood. Victory had a price, and time itself would collect it. Temporal shockwaves tore across the fleet, scattering sensors and scrambling maneuvers. Lyra barked orders as ships twisted through distorted space, narrowly avoiding collisions with future selves. "Engage predictive targeting. Every shot counts twice." Kale's eyes flicked across the chrono display. Every second now carried hundreds of possible outcomes, each lethal. Ghost Senate vessels phased unpredictably, but humanity's mastery of time gave them the edge. Pulses from Titan's Chrono-Forges rippled through orbit, striking before enemy attacks could ever arrive. Every action had become anticipation. Every victory was a preemptive strike. In Titan's caverns, engineers worked feverishly. Rin's hands flew over consoles as violet arcs leapt from the Chrono-Forges. Prototype drones blinked into existence mid-flight, weapons firing before commands could even be issued. "We're threading every possible future," she said, voice taut with awe and fear. Kale's holographic hand orchestrated each sequence with surgical precision. Outside, orbital monitors tracked Senate ships dissolving under assaults that technically hadn't happened yet. Humanity had become a force outside conventional time, unstoppable, yet teetering on the brink of paradox-induced collapse. A massive temporal rift opened near Titan's equator, swallowing fleets in distorted gravity wells. Lyra screamed over the comm. "All units, brace for non-linear turbulence." Ships spun violently as ghostly echoes collided with their own weapons. Kale's voice cut through the chaos. We control the forge outputs. Synchronize with rift vectors now. Every movement required anticipating multiple futures at once. Crew members fought nausea and fear while dodging attacks that existed both in the past and the future. The battlefield had become a storm of probability, where survival was dictated by mastery of the impossible. Deep below, Chrono-Forges pulsed violently, saturating the cavern with violet light. Engineers recalibrated energy dampeners to stabilize the rift, while drones materialized in midair, adapting to the chaotic currents above. If the rift collapses, all of Titan's surface is at risk, Rin shouted, voice cracking. Kale's projection hovered, issuing corrections in real time. Each pulse birthed weapons before the enemy even aimed, bending causality into a preemptive assault. Outside, ghost fleets were trapped in a spiral of temporal distortion, unable to strike without preemptive retaliation. Humanity was not just surviving. Their weapons dictated the war. Kale studied the chrono readings. Anomalies spiked dangerously near Titan's orbit. "They're deploying paradox engines," he muttered. Lyra barked over the comm. "All cruisers maintain formation. Avoid overlapping chronovectors." Ghost ships twisted violently, some vanishing entirely while others appeared mid-strike. Each vessel's fate now hinged on probability streams calculated by Titan's Chrono-Forges. Missiles phased through space to strike non-existent holes. Every shot was a gamble, but humanity's foresight kept them one step ahead. "Anticipate their next temporal shock. Predict it before it happens," Kale ordered. Beneath the ice, engineers increased forge output. Weapons blinked into existence mid-construction, and drones deployed along multiple projected attack vectors simultaneously. "We're creating a temporal firewall," Rin said, voice tense. Violet arcs warped the cavern walls, bending light and time around mortal hands. Kale's projection guided sequences to counter paradox engines, coordinating assaults that technically hadn't occurred yet. Outside, the Senate fleet faltered, destabilized by weapons striking before engagement. Humanity had become a master of cause and effect, dangerously close to bending reality beyond repair. Lyra's fleet navigated through swirling distortions, ghost vessels flickering in impossible patterns. "Focus on phased targeting," she ordered. Kyle monitored chrono signals as ships fired at enemies that existed only in potential futures. Explosions shattered both space and time, leaving glowing voids in place of obliterated warships. Crewmen clutched consoles, struggling to comprehend the paradoxes unfolding around them. Every maneuver risked erasure, yet anticipation guided them. Humanity had become an orchestra of preemptive strikes, threading the battlefield with a precision no conventional fleet could match. Beneath Titan, Chrono-Forges pulsed at maximum frequency, churning out drones and plasma rifles ahead of real-time battle demands. Rin adjusted sequences, ensuring synchronization with the fleet above. "We are shaping outcomes before they exist," she whispered. Kale's projection moved across holographic schematics, predicting Senate countermeasures before they materialized. Outside, ghost fleets faltered under attacks from futures that technically had not yet occurred. Humanity's gamble had begun paying dividends, but each victory rippled across reality, threatening consequences that might strike back unpredictably. The void above Titan burned with violet energy as rifts warped the battlefield. Lyra ordered volleys that phased between reality layers, striking ghost ships with unerring precision. Kale's hands flew across the console, calculating trajectories that spanned multiple futures simultaneously. "Keep the line stable. Every second counts," he shouted. Ships twisted and collided with phantom counterparts, yet survived through predictive guidance. Humanity was no longer just fighting. They were dictating the flow of time, bending enemy plans before they could even exist. Beneath Titan, engineers pushed Chrono-Forges to their limits. Violet arcs and pulses twisted around cavern walls as drones and plasma units materialized mid-action, striking before enemy ordnance could fire. If we maintain synchronization, we control the siege, Rin whispered, voice tight with concentration. Kale's projection orchestrated each release with surgical precision. Outside, the Senate Armada faltered, trapped in temporal traps laid moments before they could plan them. Humanity had turned time itself into a weapon, a preemptive hammer striking before the first blow was ever thrown. The fleet twisted through distorted space, engines roaring against impossible gravitational anomalies. Lyra's voice cut through chaos. All units, maintain vector alignment with predicted rift patterns. Kale scanned chrono readings. Every maneuver was both defensive and offensive, calculated across multiple probable futures. Ghost ships collided with phantom projectiles, dissolving in bursts of temporal energy. The fleet moved like a single organism, threading precise patterns through overlapping timelines. Humanity's mastery of Chrono-Forges allowed them to anticipate attacks before the enemy even conceived them. Beneath Titan, violet arcs surged from the Chrono-Forges, shaping drones and plasma cannons mid-air. Rin adjusted sequences to match fleet coordinates, hands trembling as energy rippled across the cavern walls. Each pulse created weapons that existed in both the present and the imminent future. Kale's projection hovered, guiding operations with exacting precision. Outside, orbital sensors tracked Senate vessels faltering under preemptive strikes. Humanity's gamble was paying off, but each victory bent reality closer to the breaking point, threatening catastrophic paradoxes with every second that passed. A wave of temporal anomalies surged through the battlefield. Lyra's fleet twisted and weaved as distortions ripped through space. "Brace for paradox shockwaves," she shouted. Ghost Senate ships phased unpredictably, some firing weapons centuries ahead of construction. Kale's hands flew over the console, synchronizing countermeasures with chrono-forged data streams. Every movement was a calculation of probabilities, a delicate dance across fractured time. The fleet's cohesion was maintained only by predictive modeling, a precise orchestration of reality bending at humanity's command. Inside Titan's caverns, engineers struggled to stabilize Chrono-Forges under the paradox storm. Violet arcs twisted erratically, bending light and time around mortal hands. "If we miscalculate, the entire battlefield collapses," Rin muttered. Drones blinked into existence along multiple predicted trajectories, striking ghost fleets before their attacks could occur. Kale's projection hovered over cascading schematics, adjusting every sequence in real time. Humanity's preemptive strategy had begun dictating outcomes, but every pulse risked unraveling both fleets into irrecoverable chaos. Sensors screamed as overlapping timelines collided. Ships flickered, phasing in and out of existence. Lyra barked orders, "Hold formation, engage predictive targeting arrays." Kale monitored chronosignatures, calculating hundreds of potential outcomes per second. Ghost fleets dissolved under preemptive barrages while temporal distortions threatened to twist vessels into nothingness. Every maneuver became a gamble with reality itself. Humanity's advantage lay in anticipating attacks before they happened, but the strain on crew and systems was palpable. Each second stretched across multiple possible timelines, each more dangerous than the last. Beneath Titan, the Chrono-Forges pulsed with violet intensity, creating drones and weapons before operators could even command them. Rin's hands flew across consoles, adjusting sequences in real time to account for shifting rift vectors. "We are threading every possible outcome," she whispered, eyes wide. Kale's projection orchestrated operations with surgical precision, coordinating attacks across the fleet above. Ghost Senate ships faltered under assault before their crews could react. Humanity had transformed time itself into a weapon, but every preemptive strike deepened the paradox, threatening consequences that even the Chrono-Forges couldn't predict. A massive temporal rift tore open near Titan's equator, swallowing sections of the fleet in warped gravity wells. Lyra shouted, "Brace for non-linear collapse." Ships twisted violently, some colliding with phantom projections of themselves. Kale's voice rang out, Synchronize with forge outputs. Contain the breach. Sensors screamed instability as ghost vessels were caught mid-phase. Every action risked erasure, yet anticipation guided the fleet. Humanity was threading impossibility with precision, bending reality to survive. As cruisers twisted through distorted coordinates, dodging attacks from futures that technically didn't yet exist. Deep below, Chrono-Forges pulsed violently, stabilizing the rift while producing preemptive weaponry. Drones blinked into existence along calculated vectors, striking before enemy actions could manifest. Rin's voice cracked with tension. If we fail, Titan itself may vanish. Kyle's projection hovered, orchestrating sequences across the cavern. Outside, ghost fleets faltered under assaults from moments yet to occur. Humanity's mastery of time had turned the tide. But the paradox grew, a lurking threat poised to undo both victories and existence itself. Lyra's fleet launched a synchronized assault, firing phased volleys that struck Ghost Senate ships before their crews could react. Focus on predictive volleys. Every shot counts twice, she shouted. Kale monitored the chrono signals, calculating dozens of probable outcomes for each strike. Ghost ships dissolved mid-engagement, caught in assaults that technically hadn't happened yet. Crew members braced against G-forces as ships twisted through impossible trajectories. Humanity was dictating the battlefield, bending enemy plans and shaping victory before it could exist. Beneath Titan, Chrono-Forges hummed at maximum output. Violet arcs spiraled across the cavern as drones and plasma rifles materialized mid-action. Rin synchronized sequences with precise timing, voice tight with tension. Kale's projection orchestrated every pulse, ensuring preemptive strikes reached orbit before enemy counters could manifest. Outside, the Senate Armada faltered under assaults from futures that hadn't yet occurred. Humanity had turned time itself into a weapon, a preemptive hammer striking before the first blow was ever thrown. But each victory drew the shadow of paradox ever closer. Titan's orbit trembled under the assault of phased fleets. Lyra barked orders as cruisers twisted through fractured vectors, dodging attacks fired before they even existed. Sensors displayed ghostly echoes of destroyed ships, their wreckage appearing centuries ahead of reality. "Predictive maneuvers now!" Kale shouted. Every movement became a preemptive strike, threading possible futures with lethal precision. The fleet danced through a battlefield dictated not by firepower, but by mastery of time itself. Beneath Titan, Chrono-Forges glowed violet, producing weapons before commands were issued. Drones blinked into orbit mid-flight, striking phantom Senate ships that flickered in and out of existence. Rin's hands flew over consoles, adjusting outputs to stabilize rift-induced distortions. Kyle's projection orchestrated sequences, ensuring every preemptive strike aligned with the fleet above. Humanity had transformed the war into a temporal symphony, but every pulse risked paradoxes that could shatter both fleets. Victory had become a thread stretched across impossibly fragile realities. A sudden rift opened, pulling ships into distorted gravity wells. Lyra's voice cut through alarms. "Brace for collisions. Align with projected vectors." Ghost vessels collided with their own temporal echoes, warping violently under impossible stress. Kale's eyes scanned the chrono display. Every ship was both target and projectile. Humanity's fleet twisted through space, threading impossible trajectories as the Senate Armada staggered under preemptive volleys. Each strike existed both before and after execution, leaving enemies disoriented and vulnerable. Beneath Titan, engineers struggled to stabilize Chrono-Forges under temporal overload. Violet arcs pulsed violently, crafting drones and plasma arrays mid-flight. "If we lose synchronization, the fleet may collapse," Rin shouted. Kale's projection guided the sequence, adjusting outputs in real time. Weapons struck orbital targets before enemy sensors could detect them. Outside, Senate ships dissolved under assaults from futures that hadn't yet occurred. Humanity's gamble had turned the tide, But the paradox lurking behind every strike was growing, a shadow no one could ignore. Lyra's fleet unleashed a synchronized barrage, firing phased missiles that struck before they were launched. "Predictive volleys! Hit before they react," she shouted. Kale monitored chrono signals, calculating dozens of overlapping outcomes. Ghost ships flickered violently under the assault, some vanishing mid-strike. Every maneuver was a gamble with reality itself, yet humanity maintained control. Crew members gripped consoles as their vessels twisted through impossible trajectories, threading a battlefield where anticipation dictated life and death. Beneath Titan, Chrono-Forges hummed at maximum output. Violet arcs rippled across cavern walls as drones and plasma rifles blinked into existence mid-flight. Rin coordinated sequences with surgical precision, hands moving faster than thought. Kale's projection orchestrated every pulse, ensuring each strike hit orbital targets before enemy counters could fire. Outside, the Senate Armada faltered, trapped in a web of preemptive assaults. Humanity had weaponized time itself, striking before the first shot was even conceived. But each victory deepened the paradox, threatening consequences yet unseen. Temporal rifts tore across Titan's orbit, scattering sensors and scrambling maneuvers. Lyra barked, "Mirror-predicted vectors, maintain formation." Ships twisted violently, colliding with phantom duplicates while dodging attacks fired centuries ahead. Kale's hands flew over the console, orchestrating maneuvers that spanned multiple possible futures. Humanity's fleet danced across timelines, threading impossible trajectories while preemptive strikes disoriented the Senate Armada. As cruisers twisted through fractured reality, dodging attacks from futures that technically didn't exist, beneath Titan, Chrono-Forges pulsed violently, crafting drones and plasma arrays in microseconds. Rin adjusted sequences to match shifting rift vectors, voice taut with tension. Kale's projection guided engineers, ensuring each strike aligned with fleet movements. Ghost ships faltered under preemptive assaults, their crews struggling to react to weapons that existed simultaneously in the present and imminent future. Humanity had gained control, but the paradoxes they generated threatened to unravel victories before they could be secured. Time had become both weapon and danger. The Senate fleet recoiled as the human armada executed a perfect convergence, firing preemptive volleys that struck simultaneously across multiple temporal vectors. Lyra's voice boomed over comms. "Converge, all fire. Do not hesitate." Kale's eyes flicked over the chrono readings. Every strike was calculated across overlapping futures. Ghost ships dissolved under the assault, attacks nullified before deployment. Humanity had orchestrated the battlefield, bending time itself into a weapon of devastating efficiency. Beneath Titan, engineers pushed Chrono-Forges to their limits. Violet energy surged as drones and plasma rifles blinked into existence mid-flight. Rin's hands moved in precise choreography, aligning every pulse with orbital projections. Kale's projection hovered above cascading schematics, ensuring perfect synchronization. Outside, Senate ships faltered, trapped by preemptive strikes that technically hadn't occurred yet. Humanity had won the first major confrontation, but every victory deepened paradoxes, casting long shadows over what the future might demand. Titan's orbit had become a proving ground for mastery over time itself. Alarms blared across the Erebus. Lyra's crew scrambled as hidden interference struck the fleet's chronosensors. "Sabotage!" Kale roared. Phantom signals twisted sensor readings, forcing vessels into erratic maneuvers. Ghost Senate units exploited the confusion, firing attacks phased through fragmented timelines. Every second was a gamble. A single misstep could erase cruisers mid-orbit. Lyra barked, "Stabilize vectors, override corrupted nodes." Humanity's mastery over time was tested by unseen hands working to unravel it from within. Beneath Titan, Rin's console flickered violently. Chrono-Forges trembled under forced feedback loops. "Someone's tampering with temporal sequences," she whispered. Kale's projection moved rapidly, overriding compromised protocols. Drones blinked into existence along corrected vectors, striking phantom targets before Senate sabotage could propagate. Violet arcs twisted across cavern walls as engineers raced to stabilize outputs. Humanity had countered the first shadow attack, but the enemy had proven they could manipulate not just space, but time itself. The Senate Armada adapted, deploying ghost drones that phased unpredictably through reality. Lyra shouted orders: predictive targeting, full power, counter their phasing. Kale studied overlapping chrono readings, calculating dozens of future paths simultaneously. Ghost ships collided with preemptive strikes, but some evaded destruction, forcing the fleet to improvise mid-engagement. Humanity's mastery was challenged. Even Chrono-Forged preemption had limits. The void pulsed with distorted energy as both sides fought not just ships, but the flow of time itself. Beneath Titan, Rin adjusted temporal dampeners, directing Chrono-Forges to anticipate Senate countermeasures. Drones blinked in midair, firing at units that hadn't yet deployed. Kale's holographic hand moved over schematics, guiding weapon release with surgical precision. Outside, ghost drones faltered under preemptive attacks, yet new threats emerged from impossible vectors. Humanity had bought an advantage, but every engagement layered paradoxes deeper into the battlefield. Every victory now carried the risk of erasing what had already been won. A new rift tore open near Titan, stretching several hundred kilometers across orbit. Lyra shouted, "Brace for temporal collapse. Maintain fleet cohesion." Ships twisted violently as distorted gravity wells collided with phasing vessels. Kale's fingers flew across consoles, coordinating maneuvers across multiple timelines. Ghost Senate units tried to exploit the rift, but humanity's chrono-forged weapons struck preemptively, neutralizing attacks before they could manifest. Time itself groaned under the strain. Beneath Titan, Chrono-Forges hummed at peak capacity. Violet energy spiraled across cavern walls as drones and plasma arrays blinked into existence mid-action. Rin adjusted outputs to counter rift distortion, sweat running down her face. Call's projection hovered, coordinating every sequence in real time. Outside, Senate ships faltered under preemptive strikes, but the rift threatened to destabilize the entire orbital battlefield. Humanity's mastery over time had won battles, but the war itself teetered on the edge of reality's collapse. The Senate fleet launched a fractured assault, phasing in unpredictable formations. Lyra's voice cut through alarms. "Engage! Phased volleys. Adjust to temporal vectors." Ghost ships collided with their own shadows, while humans fired predictive volleys at targets that technically hadn't yet appeared. Kale's eyes scanned chronosignatures, guiding maneuvers across multiple overlapping outcomes. The battlefield had become a lattice of probabilities, every strike carefully threaded through impossible futures. Beneath Titan, Chrono-Forges pulsed with violet fury. Drones blinked into orbital trajectories mid-flight, striking ghost ships before they could react. Rin coordinated outputs, hands moving faster than thought. Kale's projection ensured preemptive strikes aligned perfectly with fleet movements. Outside, Senate units faltered under assaults from futures yet to exist. Humanity's mastery over temporal warfare was undeniable, but every calculated advantage rippled into new paradoxes, threatening to undermine victories at any moment. Kale's console lit up with multiple alerts. "They've deployed a temporal anchor," Rin warned. Lyra's fleet felt the pull as ships slowed against distorted time fields. "Hold formation. Override the anchor," Kale shouted. Ghost ships twisted unnaturally. Some frozen mid-strike, others accelerated unpredictably. The Senate had escalated, bending not just ships but the flow of seconds themselves. Humanity's advantage teetered on the edge of collapse. Beneath Titan, Chrono-Forges surged to counter the anchor. Violet arcs crackled across cavern walls as drones and plasma units blinked into existence preemptively. Rin synchronized outputs with orbital vectors, hands shaking with intensity. Kale's projection orchestrated sequences across multiple timelines, threading a delicate counterstrike. Outside, the Senate Armada faltered under precise preemptive fire, but the anchor's distortions threatened to unravel all gains. Victory had a cost, and the shadow of paradox loomed larger than ever. The Senate's temporal anchor pulsed violently, freezing sections of Lyra's fleet mid-maneuver. "Hold positions, stabilize chronovectors," Kyle shouted. Ghost ships flickered, caught between seconds, weapons firing into space. Every ship had become both target and shield, every crew member a participant in a war with time itself. As vessels twisted to align with preemptive strike paths, humanity's mastery was challenged as the anchor threatened to rewrite the battlefield before any decisions could fully manifest. Beneath Titan, Chrono-Forges surged to counteract the anchor. Violet arcs tore across cavern walls, drones blinking into existence mid-flight to strike frozen enemies. Rin coordinated outputs with surgical precision, hands moving faster than thought. Kale's projection orchestrated every sequence in real time, threading preemptive strikes across multiple futures. Outside, Senate vessels staggered under assault, but the anchor remained, a looming threat that could collapse timelines and erase both fleets if mismanaged. Humanity had gained an advantage, but paradoxes now threatened to consume victory itself. Lyra barked over comm. "All cruisers, synchronize predictive volleys. Exploit their temporal freeze." Ships twisted through impossible angles, firing at Ghost Senate units trapped mid-phase. Explosions reverberated across orbit, some occurring before missiles were technically launched. Kale monitored chrono readings, adjusting maneuvers in real time. Humanity was threatening impossibility, striking enemies before threats could exist. Every salvo was a gamble with causality, but each success tilted the balance toward survival. Inside Titan, Rin pushed Chrono-Forges to maximum capacity. Drones materialized along preempted attack vectors, firing plasma cannons before enemy counters could exist. Violet arcs warped reality around the cavern as engineers raced to stabilize energy flows. Kale's projection hovered above cascading schematics, orchestrating every pulse. Outside, Senate units faltered under assaults from futures that hadn't yet occurred. Humanity's preemptive strategy held, but every strike sent ripples of paradox across the battlefield, threatening unintended consequences that could undo even the most precise victories. The temporal anchor trembled under coordinated volleys from Lyra's fleet. Ghost Senate ships faltered, some dissolving mid-attack, others flickering unpredictably. Kale's fingers flew over the console, aligning every maneuver with predicted rift vectors. "Maintain pressure, exploit their destabilization," he shouted. Ships twisted and phased simultaneously, threading the battlefield with impossible precision, as cruisers dodged attacks before they had been fired, and humanity's control over time became undeniable, but precarious. Beneath Titan, Chrono-Forges pulsed violently, creating drones and plasma rifles ahead of projected threats. Rin adjusted outputs, synchronizing sequences with orbital vectors. Violet arcs danced across cavern walls as machines preemptively neutralized the Senate's temporal gambits. Kale's projection orchestrated operations across multiple overlapping futures, ensuring that preemptive strikes struck orbital targets before attacks could manifest. Humanity had gained the upper hand, but paradoxes now spread like fractures through the battlefield, threatening to undo what they had won. Alarms shrieked across the fleet as distortions intensified. "Temporal feedback escalating. Brace for collapse," Lyra shouted. Ships twisted violently, colliding with ghost projections of themselves. Kale's eyes scanned chronosignatures. Every movement carried multiple probabilities, some lethal. Ghost Senate ships fired from impossible vectors, yet phased volleys from humanity countered them before threats fully existed. Crew clinging to consoles as preemptive strikes dictated survival. Humanity's advantage was clear, but the battlefield teetered on the brink of catastrophic paradox. Inside Titan, Chrono-Forges vibrated violently, energy spiraling across cavern walls. Rin adjusted sequences, drones blinking into existence mid-action to strike preemptive targets. Kyle's projection moved across schematics, threading attacks through multiple futures simultaneously. Outside, Senate units staggered under assaults from futures that hadn't yet occurred. Humanity had turned time into a weapon, but each strike deepened paradoxical instability, threatening not only the enemy fleet but the very fabric of reality surrounding Titan. The Senate armada faltered as predictive volleys struck across overlapping timelines. Lyra shouted, "Converge all fire! Final preemptive strike!" Kale monitored chrono readings, ensuring every shot aligned with projected enemy movements before they occurred. Ghost ships dissolved mid-phase, attacks neutralized before deployment, as cruisers twisted through fracturing space-time, threading trajectories that only humanity could calculate. Victory was close, but the cost of bending time so thoroughly weighed heavily across the fleet. Beneath Titan, Chrono-Forges pulsed at full intensity. Drones and plasma rifles blinked into orbital combat mid-flight, striking Senate vessels before they could react. Rin's hands flew across consoles, synchronizing outputs with surgical precision. Kale's projection orchestrated every pulse, threading preemptive strikes across multiple futures. The Senate fleet faltered completely under the barrage, but paradox ripples spread dangerously across reality. Humanity had won the first major battle, dictating victory before it technically existed, but the shadow of temporal consequences loomed, promising that no victory came without a price. The battlefield above Titan was eerily silent. Ghost Senate ships flickered, some dissolved, some trapped in temporal loops. Lyra's fleet hovered, engines humming, tense with anticipation. "Assess damage, check chronostability," Kale ordered. Sensors displayed fractured timelines, some promising victories, others hinting at catastrophic collapse. Every crew member felt the weight of manipulating time itself. Humanity had won the battle, but each preemptive strike had sent ripples across the fabric of reality, consequences that might strike back when least expected. Beneath Titan, Rin monitored the Chrono-Forges, violet arcs stabilizing slowly. Drones and plasma units blinked into standby, ready for the next engagement. "Temporal feedback is still high," she warned. Kale's projection hovered over schematics, tracing paradox signatures that threatened to expand. Every weapon produced in preemptive loops had altered timelines subtly, and those changes could cascade. Humanity had dictated victory, but the battlefield itself groaned under the strain. The war was won today, but time's balance remained fragile, threatening the next escalation. Alarms trilled as minor paradoxes erupted across the fleet. Some ships flickered, moments of erasure threatening to undo them entirely. Lyra barked, "Stabilize chronofields, focus on containment." Kyle adjusted sequences rapidly, threading ships back into reality. Crew members struggled against temporal disorientation, some seeing themselves before the battle began. Every preemptive maneuver had consequences. Even victories created fractures. Humanity's success had cost them control of small but dangerous slices of time itself. Beneath Titan, violet arcs pulsed erratically across Chrono-Forges. Rin recalibrated outputs, drones phasing in and out mid-construction to repair temporal fractures. Kale's projection oversaw the stabilization, adjusting multiple futures simultaneously. Every adjustment aimed to prevent paradoxes from cascading into catastrophic failures. Humanity had mastered preemptive war, but the battlefield's feedback reminded them that controlling time came at a cost. One misstep, one misaligned pulse, and victory could unravel into chaos. Lyra convened a fleet-wide briefing, holograms flickering with multiple timeline overlays. "We hold Titan's orbit, but our advantage is fragile," she warned. Kale pointed to unstable rift zones, highlighting potential paradox hotspots. Our preemptive strikes succeeded, but each one sent ripples into the future, he explained. Officers nodded, understanding that victory today didn't guarantee survival tomorrow. Humanity's edge relied on continued mastery of Chrono-Forges and careful navigation of timelines that were increasingly unstable. Beneath Titan, Rin analyzed forge outputs, violet pulses dancing across cascading schematics. Drones and weapons were recalibrated to maintain temporal coherence. We must stabilize all sequences before the Senate can exploit any residual paradoxes, she warned. Kale's projection coordinated the sequence adjustments, aligning every orbital strike with potential future contingencies. Humanity had secured a tactical victory, but each measure now carried a heavier risk. Time itself had become a battlefield, and the next move required precision beyond human instinct. The Senate fleet retreated, but temporal echoes lingered. Lyra studied holographic projections of potential enemy countermeasures. "They'll adapt. They always do," she said grimly. Kale's console displayed overlapping timelines showing probable ambush points. Humanity's advantage had bought time, but each ripple of paradox created uncertainty. Every decision was a calculation of probabilities, every maneuver a thread in a web of unstable futures. As ships repositioned, preparing for the next engagement. Beneath Titan, Chrono-Forges hummed quietly, drones idling yet ready. Rin adjusted sequences to preempt potential Senate maneuvers, projecting attacks across multiple futures. Kale's projection hovered, ensuring synchronization with orbital vectors. Violet arcs reflected off cavern walls, bending light like fractured time. Humanity had maintained control, but the shadows of paradox now loomed, threatening to destabilize their hold over Titan's orbit. Victory was temporary, and the war's next phase promised both ingenuity and danger. Sensors detected new Senate formations emerging beyond Titan's orbit. Lyra's jaw tightened. They're regrouping, preparing for escalation. Kale overlaid predictive models across the fleet, calculating outcomes that spanned multiple potential engagements. Humanity's preemptive advantage could buy them a few minutes, or a catastrophe. The fleet assumed defensive patterns, ready to thread the battlefield with precision. Time itself had become both weapon and battlefield. Beneath Titan, Rin increased Chrono-Forge output cautiously. Drones blinked into readiness, plasma rifles phased into orbital positions. Kale's projection orchestrated sequences across overlapping timelines, preparing for preemptive strikes. Every pulse now carried heavier stakes. Paradoxes from previous battles threatened to cascade into new dangers. Humanity had survived the first decisive confrontation, but the Senate's next escalation promised chaos beyond anything the fleet had yet faced. Titan's orbit was no longer just a battleground. It was the fulcrum of a war over time itself. Sensors screamed as Senate fleets surged back with phased assault units. Lyra's voice cut through alarms. "Brace for counterstrike, predictive volleys, full power." Ghost ships twisted through impossible trajectories, firing at points humanity hadn't yet occupied. Kale's eyes scanned overlapping chrono readings, calculating dozens of probable outcomes simultaneously. Humanity's fleet twisted through fracturing vectors, threading preemptive strikes into the heart of enemy formations. Every move was a gamble with causality itself. Beneath Titan, Chrono-Forges pulsed violently. Violet arcs lanced across cavern walls as drones blinked into existence mid-flight, striking Senate units before they fully materialized. Rin's hands moved in precise synchronization, adjusting every pulse. Kale's projection orchestrated sequences across multiple futures, countering Senate strategies preemptively. The fleet gained ground, but each preemptive strike deepened paradox ripples across reality. Humanity had met the counterstrike, but the battlefield itself threatened to collapse under the strain of manipulated time. Temporal distortions intensified, rifts expanding unpredictably. Lyra shouted, "Stabilize chronofields. Every ship, align with predicted vectors." Ghost Senate ships flickered violently, some vanishing mid-attack, others striking from impossible angles. Kale's fingers flew across the console, threading maneuvers through multiple potential futures. Each preemptive strike bought advantage, but paradoxes multiplied exponentially, threatening to erase both fleets if mismanaged. Humanity's mastery of time became a delicate balancing act on the edge of catastrophe. Inside Titan, violet energy spiraled across the Chrono-Forges. Rin recalibrated sequences, drones materializing along anticipated attack paths before threats could exist. Kale's projection moved across cascading schematics, adjusting outputs in real time to counter paradox feedback. Outside, Senate vessels faltered under preemptive strikes, but temporal instability spread, distorting sensor readings and weapon trajectories. Humanity had gained the upper hand, but the paradox cascade was a looming threat, poised to unravel both victory and survival if it continued unchecked. A massive rift tore open near Titan, stretching across orbital paths. Lyra barked orders, "Brace for non-linear collapse, maintain formation." Ships twisted violently, colliding with phantom projections of themselves. Ghost fleets fired from impossible vectors, yet preemptive volleys struck before attacks could manifest. Kale's console overflowed with chronosignals, calculating hundreds of overlapping trajectories. As cruisers threaded impossible vectors, dodging attacks from futures that technically didn't exist, humanity was surviving, but the rift threatened catastrophic instability. Beneath Titan, Chrono-Forges hummed at maximum capacity. Violet arcs twisted across cavern walls, drones, and plasma arrays blinking into orbital trajectories preemptively. Rin adjusted outputs in real time, countering rift distortions while stabilizing production sequences. Kale's projection coordinated strikes across multiple futures, threading attacks to neutralize Senate vessels before they could react. Humanity had maintained control, but every adjustment rippled paradoxes deeper into the battlefield, threatening to unravel victories with each passing second. Alarms shrieked as temporal feedback spiked, distorting ships mid-orbit. Lyra shouted, "Brace for collapse! Synchronize all chronofields!" Ghost Senate ships twisted violently, some phasing out of reality, others striking from non-existent angles. Kale's hands flew across consoles, threading maneuvers across dozens of potential futures. Preemptive strikes hit before enemy attacks could exist, but the battlefield teetered on the edge of catastrophic paradox, threatening erasure of both fleets if calculations faltered. Inside Titan, Chrono-Forges vibrated violently. Drones materialized mid-action, plasma rifles firing preemptively. Rin's hands adjusted outputs, compensating for feedback loops that threatened to destabilize the cavern. Kale's projection coordinated sequences with surgical precision, attempting to thread stability into chaos. Outside, Senate vessels faltered, but paradox ripples spread, twisting reality around the fleet. Humanity had the upper hand, but the first signs of preemptive collapse warned that victory might come at the cost of existence itself. The void above Titan shimmered with violent energy. Lyra's fleet teetered, ships phasing unpredictably. "Hold positions, maintain chronostability," she shouted. Ghost ships dissolved mid-strike while others fired from impossible coordinates. Kale's fingers danced across consoles, stabilizing overlapping timelines while threading preemptive strikes into the heart of the Senate Armada. As vessels twisted through fractured space-time, threading impossible trajectories. Humanity's mastery had held, but every second threatened erasure. Beneath Titan, Chrono-Forges blazed with violet intensity, drones and plasma rifles materializing preemptively in precise orbital vectors. Rin's hands flew across consoles, adjusting sequences to counter escalating paradox feedback. Kyle's projection coordinated every pulse, threading attacks across multiple overlapping futures. The Senate fleet faltered, but the shadows of temporal instability spread like cracks across reality. Humanity had survived, but Titan's orbit now balanced on the brink of erasure. Every victory had a cost, and the next engagement promised consequences beyond calculation. Titan's orbit trembled as fractures widened across the battlefield. Lyra shouted, "Stabilize chronofields, brace for structural collapse." Ships flickered violently, phasing in and out of existence, while ghost Senate units fired from impossible angles. Kale's fingers flew across consoles, threading maneuvers across dozens of overlapping futures. Every preemptive strike was a gamble with causality itself, and every victory threatened to fracture the fleet into non-existence. Beneath Titan, Chrono-Forges pulsed violently. Violet arcs warped cavern walls as drones blinked into existence mid-action, striking preemptively. Rin adjusted sequences to compensate for expanding paradoxes, sweat streaking her face. Kale's projection orchestrated attacks across multiple overlapping timelines, coordinating the fleet above. Humanity had stabilized sections of the battlefield, but paradox ripples spread, threatening not only victory but the very reality surrounding Titan. Time itself had become a battlefield, and it was fracturing. Lyra ordered every cruiser into tight formation, threading coordinated volleys through the most unstable rift zones. "Predictive volleys, maximum output," she barked, as ships twisted through distorted vectors, phasing past attacks fired before they existed. Kale monitored chrono readings, adjusting sequences for dozens of possible futures. Humanity had no margin for error. One miscalculation could erase the fleet before victory could even be declared. Inside Titan, Rin pushed Chrono-Forges beyond rated capacity. Drones blinked into preemptive attack paths, plasma rifles firing mid-flight at Ghost Senate vessels. Violet energy arced violently, twisting the cavern in chaotic beauty. Kale's projection orchestrated every pulse with surgical precision. Humanity had gained a fragile advantage, but paradoxes now threatened to spiral, unraveling carefully calculated strikes. Every action became both salvation and risk, and the next few moments could decide existence itself. Temporal distortions intensified, rifts expanding unpredictably. Lyra's fleet twisted violently, some ships colliding with projections of themselves. "Brace for temporal surge," she yelled. Ghost Senate ships fired from impossible coordinates, but predictive volleys struck before attacks could exist. Kale's hands flew over consoles, threading maneuvers across multiple overlapping timelines. Humanity's mastery of time bought them moments, but paradoxes multiplied exponentially, threatening catastrophic collapse. Beneath Titan, Chrono-Forges pulsed with violent intensity. Drones blinked mid-flight along preempted attack vectors, plasma arrays firing ahead of enemy maneuvers. Rin adjusted outputs frantically, stabilizing sequences while compensating for cascading paradoxes. Kale's projection orchestrated attacks across multiple futures, but feedback ripples spread like cracks across reality. Humanity held the advantage, but the battlefield itself teetered on the edge of collapse, and even victory could come at the cost of existence. Lyra's fleet moved in synchronized precision, threading preemptive volleys through rift-fractured space. "Converge on their anchor points, exploit every instability," she shouted. Ships phased past impossible attacks, striking Ghost Senate units before they could manifest. Kale's eyes flicked across chrono readings, ensuring every maneuver intersected multiple probable futures. Humanity fought not just for victory, but for survival in a battlefield that defied time itself. Beneath Titan, Chrono-Forges pulsed with violet arcs, drones, and plasma rifles materializing mid-action along preempted vectors. Rin adjusted outputs frantically, coordinating every pulse with orbital movements. Kale's projection threaded attacks across multiple timelines, countering Senate maneuvers before they existed. Humanity's advantage persisted, but paradox ripples now threatened to destabilize even their preemptive strategies. Survival required threading every moment perfectly, or risking collapse into temporal oblivion. The void above Titan shimmered with chaotic energy. Lyra's fleet twisted violently, some ships flickering toward erasure. "Hold formation! Stabilize chronofields!" she shouted. Ghost Senate ships fired from impossible angles, yet preemptive volleys struck first. As vessels threaded impossible trajectories, avoiding attacks from futures that technically didn't exist. Humanity had survived so far, but each victory deepened paradoxes, threatening to erase both fleets. Inside Titan, Chrono-Forges pulsed at maximum capacity. Drones blinked mid-flight into orbital positions, plasma rifles firing preemptively. Rin's hands flew across consoles, adjusting sequences in real time. Kale's projection orchestrated attacks across overlapping futures, threading preemptive strikes with precision. The Senate Armada faltered, but paradox feedback ripples spread like cracks across reality. Humanity had held the line, but Titan's orbit now balanced on the edge of temporal collapse, and the next engagement promised chaos beyond comprehension. Titan's orbit quaked as the Senate deployed its ultimate temporal device. Lyra's fleet twisted violently through overlapping rifts. "Brace for the breach! All units, synchronize volleys!" she shouted. Ghost ships phased unpredictably, striking from impossible vectors, while Kale's console overflowed with chaotic chrono signals. Humanity threaded impossible maneuvers, firing preemptive volleys before attacks could even exist. Every second became a battle for existence itself. Beneath Titan, Chrono-Forges roared at maximum output. Violet arcs illuminated the cavern as drones blinked into orbital combat mid-flight. Rin's hands moved with surgical precision, stabilizing sequences while compensating for feedback surges. Kale's projection orchestrated every strike across multiple timelines. The Senate fleet staggered, but the breach's energy threatened to collapse the entire battlefield. Humanity's victory hung on a knife edge, one misstep from temporal annihilation. Temporal rifts tore open violently, threatening to shred the fleet. Lyra shouted over alarms, "Hold positions! Synchronize chronofields or we all vanish!" Ghost Senate ships twisted through impossible coordinates, some firing before they existed. Kale's fingers danced across consoles, threading maneuvers across dozens of potential futures. Humanity's preemptive strikes held, but paradox ripples intensified, threatening erasure. As cruisers twisted through fractured reality, survival depended on precise calculations. Inside Titan, Chrono-Forges pulsed violet energy violently. Drones blinked mid-flight along preemptive attack vectors, plasma rifles striking before enemies could react. Rin adjusted sequences frantically to stabilize the cavern and feed orbital strikes. Kale's projection coordinated attacks across multiple futures simultaneously, threading precision into chaos. Humanity had maintained the upper hand, but temporal feedback now threatened not just victory, but reality itself. Lyra ordered the fleet into tight formation, preemptive volleys converging on the Senate's anchor points. "Now, strike across all predicted vectors," she commanded. Ghost ships faltered, some dissolving mid-phase, others obliterated by attacks from futures that hadn't yet occurred. Kale's chrono readings blinked wildly, coordinating hundreds of overlapping trajectories. As humanity threaded the impossible battlefield, striking before threats fully manifested. Beneath Titan, Rin pushed Chrono-Forges to their limits. Drones blinked into existence along preempted paths, plasma rifles firing mid-flight. Violet arcs twisted across cavern walls, stabilizing rifts while projecting offensive sequences into orbit. Kale's projection orchestrated attacks across multiple timelines, neutralizing Senate vessels before they could act. Humanity had orchestrated a perfect convergence, but the paradox ripples now stretched to the edge of reality, threatening to undo everything they fought for. Rifts began to collapse under coordinated preemptive strikes. Lyra's fleet fired relentlessly, threading volleys through unstable vectors. Ghost Senate ships dissolved in mid-phase, unable to react to attacks that technically existed in the future. Kale adjusted chrono sequences, balancing preemptive maneuvers with collapsing paradox zones. The fleet twisted through reality, threading impossible vectors into victory. Humanity's calculated precision had neutralized the Senate anchor, and paradox feedback slowly began to stabilize. Inside Titan, Chrono-Forges hummed as violet arcs settled into steady pulses. Drones phased out, plasma rifles returned to standby. Rin monitored cascading sequences, ensuring residual paradoxes were neutralized. Kale's projection traced every overlapping timeline, confirming stabilization. Humanity had survived the brink of temporal collapse. Titan's orbit had become a testament to mastery over time, a fragile victory threaded across impossible futures. The war was won, for now, but the cost of bending reality would linger. Titan's orbit lay in eerie calm. Lyra's fleet drifted among scattered wreckage and fading rifts. "We held the line, but the future is fragile," she said, voice low. Kyle scanned chrono readings, confirming stabilized timelines. Humanity had turned time into both weapon and shield, shaping battles before they could exist. Engines hummed quietly as the fleet regrouped, the echoes of paradox fading. But the lessons remained, etched into every calculation. Beneath Titan, Chrono-Forges glowed softly. Drones and plasma units phased into standby. Rin exhaled, eyes tracing violet arcs still lingering in the cavern. Kale's projection hovered above the schematics, ensuring no residual temporal instability remained. Humanity had survived the impossible, bending time itself to fight tomorrow's war today. Titan had become a crucible, shaping both victory and wisdom. The Chrono-Forges remained, a silent promise. The future could be forged, but at a cost only those daring enough to wield time would ever understand. The end. Thank you for watching AstroMyths. If you enjoyed this story, smash that like button and subscribe for more epic sci-fi tales, cosmic mysteries, and mind-bending myths. And if you like this story, or have a myth, mystery, or galaxy you'd like us to explore, drop your ideas in the comments. We're always listening. Until next time, keep your eyes on the stars and your mind open to the unknown.